Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Josie Smith. I'm the Events and Social Media Coordinator for Madison Street Books. We're a new-ish indie bookstore in Chicago's West Loop. We opened in March of 2020. We are so excited tonight to be here in celebration of Coco at the Ritz, the new book by Gioia Diliberto. And joining us tonight as well is Carol Felsenthal. Before we get started, just a few little housekeeping things. Over on the right side of your screen, you'll see a chat. It says, "Say something nice." Please feel free to introduce yourselves and converse in the chat during the event. We love reading it at the end. It's a lot of fun. And your feedback and excitement is great. If at any point in tonight's conversation you have a question for either Gioia or Carol, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Ask a Question button. If you click that and ask a question about the last 10 minutes of the event, we'll get through as many of those as we can. Otherwise, let's get started. I will introduce both our authors and then I'll turn it over to Gioia for a brief reading. Gioia Diliberto has written biographies of Jane Addams, Hadley Hemingway, Diane von Furstenberg, and Brenda Fraser, as well as the critically acclaimed novels I Am Madam X and The Collection. Her books, which center on the lives of women, have been translated into several languages. As a journalist, Diliberto has contributed to many publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, Smithsonian, and Vanity Fair. She was a visiting lecturer in writing at the Savannah College of Art and Design, DePaul, and Northwestern universities. Diliberto lives in Woodbury, Connecticut. Joining us tonight as well is Carol Felsenthal. Carol is a journalist whose in-depth magazine articles about numerous political figures have received wide acclaim. She is also the author of several highly praised biographies on such high-profile figures as Alice Roosevelt Longworth, S.I. Newhouse Jr., and Katharine Graham. She lives in Chicago, Illinois. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Gioia for a reading, and then we'll have a great conversation this evening.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Josie, for the introduction, and to Madison Street Books for inviting me and Carol to have this conversation. I'm going to read a bit from the opening of the book, which is what the book is all about, the arrest and interrogation of Coco Chanel after the liberation of Paris. When the doorbell rang at 8:30 on that hot, languid morning, Coco knew they'd come to arrest her. She might have wondered for a moment if someone else was at the door, perhaps the laundress with fresh linen, or a porter with a glove she dropped in the lobby. But she knew. Though the carpet muffled their footsteps, she sensed them striding down the hall at the Ritz. Coco and her animal cunning. She knew from the fierce jangle of the bell, from the way the maid's heels clicked so frantically across the floor, and the door roared open. She knew. She crushed her cigarette in an ashtray. Her body trembled, surprising her. Lighting another cigarette, she took a moment to pull herself together. The room was warm, with the white morning sun slanting through the windows, and the air had a stale floral scent. The mixed fragrances of No. 5 perfume, tobacco, and pink roses, which were displayed on the table in crystal vases. Until that moment, she hadn't thought she'd be arrested. Now she began to worry as she peeked out the bedroom door and saw the soldiers, the two young men from the French forces of the interior, standing in her suite with their grim expressions and guns tucked into their belts. Spots had already fled Paris with the retreating Germans, and Coco was alone, as she'd so often been in life, with her fame and her money and her secrets, which kept anyone from getting too close. Of course, the men have come for her because of Spots. And that wasn't fair, because her German lover wasn't really a Nazi. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer. His mother was English, after all, and he'd lived in Paris for a third of his life. Why should she feel guilty about Spots? Anyway, she wasn't going to hide in the closet or jump out the window. She wasn't a coward. There was a soft knock on the bedroom door. Coco opened it a crack and saw the maid. Mademoiselle, what should I do? The maid whispered. Ask them to give me a minute to dress, Coco said. If they take me and I'm not back in 2 hours, tell the manager at the boutique to call Winston Churchill. The Prime Minister? Yes, his private number is in the book in my desk. Coco pushed the door shut and flipped through the hangers in her closet, deciding on her number 2 suit in navy blue jersey, a more casual version of the number 1 model she'd worn in her working days. From the jewelry box on her dressing table, she took 3 strands of pearls and a jeweled enameled cuff. She looped the pearls around her neck and secured the cuff on her wrist. Then she reconsidered the jewelry. No need to call attention to her prosperity, so she stuffed the pearls and bracelet in the drawer. Coco was 61, though she looked younger thanks to expertly dyed dark brown hair and good bone structure. Now, arranging her face in a determined expression, she smoothed her skirt and opened the bedroom door. 2 ordinary youths, dressed in brown slacks and plain white shirts, stood in the foyer. She eyed the shiny pistols jammed into their belts. Their shirts flashed armbands emblazoned with FFI and the Cross of Lorraine, the symbol of the French forces of the interior, the loose band of resistance fighters, soldiers, and private citizens who'd taken up arms in the aftermath of the German departure. Gabriel Chanel, come with us, said the taller youth. He had a spray of adolescent pimples on his cheeks, but his fine brown hair was already thinning. By whose order, she asked, louder than she intended. The people of France and the victims of fascism, said the second youth. He was short and stocky and looked even younger than his partner, with smooth pink cheeks and curly chestnut hair. The maid was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. Do you have any identification? Coco demanded. They would never see her cry. You must come with us, said the taller youth. Who gave you your orders? If you don't come voluntarily, we'll take you by force. Coco clasped her hands to stop them from trembling. On what charge? The taller boy spoke in a harsh, unflinching voice. Treason.
Okay, I guess this is my cue, right? Before the question says, I just want to tell Joy I have before. I love this novel, and I also want to repeat that it kept me up most of the night. So my circles under my eyes are Joy's fault. I also really loved the author's note, which appears at the end. And if I were Gioia's agent or editor, I would tell her to publish that separately. But for readers of the novel, don't read the author's note before you read the novel, because there's a lot of giveaways in it. Gioia and I have known each other for a long time, and we are both writers of biography. And I wondered a couple things about the genre in which you wrote this. My first question is, why a novel rather than a biography? And I have a second follow-up, but that's the first one.
Well, I would have written it as a nonfiction book had the material been there, but there just wasn't enough material. The record was too scant because of Coco's obfuscation, and also just there were no documents about her arrest and interrogation. There would have been an official court case, and she never talked about it. She left behind no letters. She never wrote a memoir. She, in fact, paid people to keep her out of their memoirs. And little was known even about how she spent the war. There's bare outline of her activities is known, but you couldn't write a nonfiction book about it. And I was so fascinated by the subject, and I wanted to wrestle with a lot of the themes I thought her involvement with the Germans raised, particularly in terms of the ambiguities of morality. And the only way I could do it was through fiction, through imagination.
You mentioned, and then when I did a bit of research in preparation for this, I came across this book. I think the author's name is Vaughn, and the title is Sleeping with the Enemy. And he had unearthed documents, but I assumed that he didn't have it buttoned up enough that it would have given you what you needed to make that part of a nonfiction work.
Yes, he unearthed, well, the documents that he relied on for his book had been recently at that time declassified. But there was nothing in them about the arrest and interrogation of Chanel. It's just a couple of sentences in his book. And also, the schemes that he mentioned were real, the documents were real, but the details were very, very murky. And of course, he had nothing about Chanel's motivations or her thoughts and feelings about what she had done during the war. So there was really nothing more to say in a nonfiction way. And what I was really after was trying to get to the heart of what her choices were, why she made them, and what the consequences were to herself and to those around her. And I had to try to explore it imaginatively. That was the only way to do it.
So one of the things that I loved about this novel, one of the things was the mix of real things with your imagination. So I found the stories about Winston Churchill. They fascinated me, and they are a very important factor in the book, especially as you get to the end of the interrogation at the end of the book. And that, I assume, is real. Her friendship with him, the fact that she would have had his personal telephone number, the experiences that you describe with him, those are actual history. Is that correct?
Yes, my first rule in writing historical fiction is to never contradict the known truth. And I try to be ruthless about that. So I only invent in the interstitials where things are unknown. And her friendship with Churchill was real. She met him during her romance with the Duke of Westminster, who at the time, in the 20s, was the richest man in England. And they spent quite a bit of time together at country house parties. They went hunting together, and Churchill was very fond of her. He found her very smart and very engaging, and she was a refreshing change from all the silly women he usually met at country house parties, who did nothing but get drunk and sleep with other people's husbands. She was a self-made woman, and he in fact had dinner with her in her atelier right before the war.
Is there any evidence that they slept together?
Winston Churchill and
in COCO. I mean, I know he did with Pamela Harriman and with others who are part of this.
No, nothing like that. And I do not have her sleeping with people. There were plenty of people that Coco slept with that you can write about, and it was true. So you don't have to invent it.
I'm Jewish, and so the story was even more resonant to me than it might have been if I didn't have my background. And when she would casually at dinner parties let out some of the most anti-Semitic and disturbing kinds of stereotypes and lines, I wondered why it was that she comes back from Switzerland to Paris in 1954 and continues her famous and beautiful work. But in America, she was considered an icon, and she was not in Paris for one. So why were Americans not aware of her activities and what could be called her collaboration, or quasi collaboration during the war? Why were Americans so innocent in the 50s and 60s?
They did not know. They did not know about her personal life. They were largely ignorant of it, unlike the French, who knew, for the most part, what she had done. So she was panned when she reopened her house in 1954, her first collection, the collection during which she showed the wool boucle suit. That's the iconic Chanel item of clothing that we all think of when we think of Chanel. We think of that suit. That's what she did in 1954. And the French panned that collection, but the Americans embraced it. And it was America that treated her return to fashion as the second coming of the fashion messiah and made her return such a huge hit.
You know, it's interesting to think if there were social media in the 1950s, she would have been a dead celebrity walking, because we would have known all these details. And it's so fascinating to me to contemplate the differences between then and now. On that question about why a novel instead of a biography, I've read read an interview with you in which you mentioned that you were originally going to write it as a play, and that's also interesting to me. I've never written fiction, but I read a lot of it, and I understand writing a play is much more difficult. Is that, and tell us why it would have been more difficult to turn this material to the stage than to the page.
Well, I did write it, and it had several staged readings in New York, including at the Actors Studio, but it never had a full production. And I found writing a play a great, exhilarating experience, though also the most difficult thing most difficult literary genre I've ever worked in. But it was an exciting form to work in and to learn about. And I originally thought a play was the way to go because it was an argument. What I was really interested in was this moment when she had been arrested and interrogated. And I imagined it as a battle of wits between the famously acerbic Chanel and two hostile young interrogators who could have cared less about her and her status in the fashion world, or could have cared less about fashion, period. Also, in writing the play, I could really look at her from a distance. I was really looking at her externally. I didn't have to be in her head. And so from that standpoint, it was easier. I didn't really have to wrestle with her dark side, her darkest side, the most unsavory aspects of her character, or the deepest motivations in the play, because I was separate. I wasn't in her head. Whereas in the novel, I really had to go there. I really had to get in and try and figure it out.
I hadn't realized how advanced or finished the play was. Now, do you see yourself in the next period of time going back to the play and doing whatever you do to getting more readings and perhaps seeing it produced?
I don't know. I think the novel is the end game for me and Coco. And once I decided to write it as a novel, because I'm a prose writer, and the novel was the fulfillment of my ideas about Coco. I mean, of course, if somebody wanted to produce the play, I wouldn't
Stop them.
Chance. But the novel was really my parting with Coco, I think.
The question I have is, do you like Coco Chanel as a human being? Because I found myself surprised, and I'm not going to give away any of the plot, but something happens at the end that made me feel like I would have. It made me feel a great deal of affection for her and worry about her. And I won't say what it was, but it's a really affecting aspect of the plot. So I did kind of, despite the anti-Semitism and sleeping with I pronounce his name in my head as Spats, but it's Spots.
Spots, spots, if
Um,
you German about it.
So did you like her? Did you like Coco Chanel?
No, but my feelings about her are so complicated. She's not a warm and fuzzy person.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have wanted her for my aunt. But I was fascinated by her. I was just absolutely, utterly fascinated. And my Chanel may be not the real Chanel, or it may not be somebody else's Chanel, but I figured her out for myself. And of course, the character in the book is the character in the book, and it has to live on the page in her own right, though I hope she says something truthful about the historical figure. And one thing I do feel about the historical Chanel is that she wasn't all bad. And she did suffer, and especially when you consider what her accomplishments were against all odds. She was born in poverty to unmarried parents. Her mother died when she was 12. Her father put her in a convent orphanage in rural France, where she had a very grim time of it. And then she managed to wedge herself into the upper echelons of Parisian society, not exactly a world that's conducive to upward mobility. And she did it at a time in France when women couldn't even vote. Women in France didn't get the right to vote till July 1944. So her accomplishments are really astounding. But her legacy is, of course, tainted by the way she behaved during the war. But I also feel that she probably suffered. And there's evidence that she suffered for those decisions that she made, those bad decisions. And I depict her suffering for some of the decisions that she made in the book.
Do you?
In a way.
I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
She's punished. She punishes herself. She's not only punished. I mean, some people may feel like she got away with it because she didn't end up in jail. And we all know she came back. I mean, that's not a secret. That's not giving anything away. We all know Chanel came back, and the brand still thrives. But I think she did suffer because of it.
Do you own Chanel suits or dresses or bags? And should her Chanel number 5, etc., should those products be products that people who have a sense of social justice or want to shy away from? Or is that, I don't know who owns Chanel now, and I don't know what, I also wanted to ask you if you've heard from any members of her family or descendants. She didn't have children, but she had the nephew who you write about. So there's a couple of questions in there at least.
Well, the Wertheimer family, who are Jewish, they own Chanel.
Still,
yes. And we could talk about that too, her complicated relationship with them. I don't think the brand ought to be canceled. If you want to wear a Chanel suit, Carol, it's fine with me. If you want to wear Chanel number 5, it's fine with me. I make a distinction between the brand and the historical figure. It's the historical figure that I'm interested in. I absolutely think if you want to wear Chanel and you can afford it, that's fine. I can't afford Chanel. I don't own any Chanel. I own one thing, a skirt that I bought in a vintage shop before I was vintage myself, long before, decades ago. And that's the only item of Chanel clothing I own. But I did a talk at the University Club in Chicago last week, and there were several women in the audience wearing Chanel, and they look great.
That's wonderful. Who do you, well, two questions. I've written many times about women, and I've written many times about men, and I much prefer writing about women. Much, much, much. You have written book, at least in the book sphere, the subjects have all been women. Can you, why, and you think as you consider more books going forward, you'll stick to the subject of women?
Yeah, I just have always written about women. I'm interested in women. I'm interested maybe because it helps me understand myself. I think women are more interesting, maybe on some emotional level. It's just my thing. I would not be interested in writing about a man. I just wouldn't. It never occurred to me to write a biography of a man or to write a novel about a man. Not to say never, I would never do it, but I've always written about women. I feel on the ground writing about women. I feel like I understand what it is to be a woman, and I'm trying to understand more about it and more about myself, and getting in the life and head of another woman is a way to do that.
And when you write biography, my experience has been that women's lives, you said women are more interesting. I agree with that. So there. I also, and it's true in Chanel's case, that women are often more intelligent than the men with whom they're partnered, either personally, professionally. And that's so true in Chanel's case. She's like a chess player, and she always is a couple of steps ahead. And it was certainly the love affair that permeates Coco at the Ritz is the one with spots. And he seems, interesting in his way, but he's sort of a dullard by comparison with her.
Well, there's certainly a lot of great men and interesting men who choose
Right.
who are lesser, aren't their intellectual equals. And one other thing that interests me about writing about women, most of the women that I've written about have reached the pinnacles of fame or the highest point in their society, negotiating the world at a time when women had no status. So that's something that has always interested me, was how women negotiate the world when they don't have any power or any status. I wrote about Jane Addams, that's the 19th century, and I think just about everyone I've written about, Diane von Furstenberg, it was the 70s, it was sort of the feminism was just going, the second wave of feminism. But that looking at how a woman like Coco Chanel negotiated her way through this world in which she really had nothing and no power and was not going to get it, certainly as a woman was at a great, great disadvantage, is something that's always interested me.
I was interested in, after the interrogation and her, and that interrogation really was a torture, kind of. I mean, but after she's released, she goes home and she goes back to her, you describe it as a suite, but it's actually, she was pulled out of her real suite and put in a maid's quarter suite. So a few questions come to mind here. When she returned to Paris, did she move back into the Ritz Hotel, and did she move back into Elegant Suite?
No, she stayed in the small rooms. She never went back to that original grand suite.
So she stayed in the suite that was designed for someone's maid. Then.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly if it was really. I mean, it's the Ritz, so it's how bad can it be? But She didn't go back to that really grand suite that she had before the war.
Have you ever stayed at the Ritz in Paris?
No.
No, I haven't either. And then, would you consider a sequel novel of her life in Switzerland with Spot? I don't know whether he remained her lover. He was 13 years her junior, and I found it very. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, she was about 61 during the heart of the novel, and he was 13 years younger and just a beautiful specimen of manhood. And I found her self-descriptions of her body as an older woman to be fascinating, and the love affair with this man, and her saying that better that he see her in the dark and so on. But I was interested that she reconnected with him, and thought it would be great to know what happened post 1944. So I'm wondering, do you have any plans for a sequel novel?
No, I don't. They did stay together for a while. He did not. He escaped arrest, and he ended up joining her in Switzerland, and they lived together for about 10 years. Then they broke up, but she continued to support him. He moved to an island off the coast of Spain where he supposedly spent his time painting nudes, and he was supported by a trust that she set up in Switzerland. For a long time, I had her voice in my head, and one reason I thought that I could write a play and then a novel about her was because I did have her voice. I could write Coco Chanel dialogue until the cows came home. But I no longer have her voice in my head, thank God. So I'm moved on. No more Coco Chanel books.
Are you writing another book, and who is the subject?
I am writing another book, and it's a nonfiction book, and it's about women, and it's set during Prohibition. But that's all I want to say about it. I don't really want to talk about what I'm doing right now.
Well, looking at your list of impressive list of books, it's really interesting to me that you wrote a biography of Jane Addams, and then you've written about Coco Chanel. Like, could you find what do they have in common?
Well, they actually do have something in common, and I would say that all of the women that I've written about, including Diane von Furstenberg, has something in common with Jane Addams. And that's probably the last time you're ever going to hear Jane Addams and Diane von Furstenberg in the same sentence. But they're all women who, in their personality and accomplishments and flaws, seem to epitomize the spirit of their era. They seem to step forward and epitomize their time, as Chanel does. To me, in many ways, Chanel symbolizes or epitomizes the treachery of France during World War II. And I think at one point in the book, she even says, I had her say, I am France. She stands in for France. And in a way, she's a kind of anti-Marianne, the French symbol of liberty, equality, and fraternity. She's the opposite, how she behaved during the war. She was the opposite of that. And that's what the Vichy was. The collaborationist government was the opposite of those ideals. So, and of all the women I've written about, you could say that in some way that they do epitomize the time in which they live.
Do you have a favorite among those women? I mean, I do. My favorite subject was Alice Roselle Longworth, who actually has a connection to many of the themes in this book, a connection to Pierre Laval, and that's interesting. But I'll talk to you about it when we lunch someday. But So do you have a favorite?
Of the people that I've written about,
Yeah, of those women you've written books about.
the book at the moment, I love the one I'm with. My favorite book is right now is Coco at the Ritz.
Okay.
That's closest to my heart.
How do you, to get into, I guess, sort of housekeeping questions, when do you write, and are you disciplined about it? Do you write a certain number of words a day, a certain number of hours a day?
I start really early in the morning.
Like what, 5 o'clock or?
And just write until I can't stop, and write every day, weekends too.
And so you might write for 5 hours or 2 hours?
Or it depends on the day and what's going on, if it's fiction or nonfiction. And early in the morning, I find is a great time to write because there aren't any distractions. But I've done that for so long, Carol. It's my life. Getting up and writing, I would feel it's like eating or brushing my teeth. It's just what I do, or breathing. It's as natural to me as breathing.
Wow. It's not to me anymore. I find it increasingly difficult, and I think it would be a good idea to turn off all the beeps and the buzzes, and not get news flashes. I'm just such a news junk.
Yeah. Whoops. I think Carol is frozen. I can't hear you, Josie. I don't know, we lost Carol.
Oh, I didn't unmute myself. I've got Carol coming back on screen. Hopefully we can get this up and running.
I hope I didn't say something to make it go away.
No, this has been lovely. Well, I've got a quick question while we wait for her to come back, if you want to answer that. I love the idea of writing about the women who you think epitomize their time. Not that you have to be writing about it, but do you have in mind any woman or women who you think epitomize our current moment?
Oh, wow. There are several that I can think of. I would say AOC. Would be one. There she's back.
I'm
Here
back.
we are.
You know what happened? I had my laptop fully charged. This must take up a lot of energy. So now I'm back in my office. I'm recharged. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
One of my better moves. I didn't realize that would happen.
No.
I don't remember what I was asking you about your writing routine. So that's pretty impressive. I wanted to, as I mentioned, that I am a big news consumer, and I've been watching politics in France close. And this Jewish family, I think, is from Algiers, and he's a political pundit and a television, because it's become a television star, kind of in the mold of a Fox News Tucker Carlson. His name is Eric Zemmour, and he is running for president of France. So, as I mentioned, he's Jewish. He's in the mold of I said Tucker Carlson, but also Donald Trump. He's anti-immigrant. He wants to limit the number. He thinks that the character and the face of France is changing because of the influx of immigrants. He wants to ban the parents from naming their children names such as Muhammad. So you get where he's coming from. He has 14% of the vote. in the first stage of the presidential elections in April. And the question that I had is wondering if I don't know whether you follow those international politics or not, but if you can see that as a latter day early 1940s France and Germany and Europe. I happen to see a lot of similarities, and it's disturbing and frightening.
It is very disturbing and frightening, and somebody ought to give him a book about the Dreyfus case.
Right.
I wonder, he's Jewish. Doesn't he? How long has he lived in? Has his family been in France since World War II?
Yeah, I think he's the first generation, but he's actually a supporter of a name that comes up in the novel, Pétain. He's a supporter of his and of many of the aspects of Vichy France, so it's fascinating to be reading about him. He's very much in the news now. At the same time, reading your novel, which is another part of the novel that I loved, in that it kind of combines the best of fiction and nonfiction for me. So it's a historical novel, but there's a lot to learn in its pages.
Thank you.
That's a compliment, and a long-winded one, but.
Well, that's the other reason why it's important, I think, in historical fiction not to contradict the known truth, because what you're getting at is the emotional truth, and you're getting at also the historical truth if you can, which is what I was trying to do in Coco at the Ritz, as much as it's known, but the emotional truth also of what it meant to live through that time and what it meant to be Coco Chanel and to make the choices that she made. And certainly what this guy in France is part of is this global fascination with these Trump-like figures, but also there's this deep strain of right-wing politics in France that's been there forever and that Chanel was part of and her circle was part of. And they were anti-Semitic in a very reflexive kind of a way. Her anti-Semitism probably grew from growing up in this convent where she probably heard a lot of anti-Semitic remarks from the nuns, and even with her family. So, but the anti-Semitism in France goes back way, way, way back. And there in Proust, there's a character, I can't remember who the character is, who sees a wing of a chateau burned down rather than get firefighting equipment from his neighbor who's a Jew. So, there's just, France has had an anti-Semitism problem forever.
Yes, definitely. I asked you before whether you had heard from, I don't know, her nephew is not still alive, is he?
No.
And she didn't have children.
Right.
I don't know who her other descendants were, but I've been following the movie that was made about the Gucci family, and they're up in arms over the portrayal of the Guccis. So that's why I was curious whether there's been any communication between you and anybody in the family.
No. She had her beloved nephew, Andre Calas, had two daughters, and I've never met them or been in communication with them. One of them, I think one of them is dead. I think one of them is still alive and has talked to biographers in the past. She was close to Coco, actually. And there were rumors that Andre Palas was really Coco's son, which he wasn't. But
he was not.
No, he was not her son. No, but that rumor persists in some quarters. But he was her sister Gioia's child, and the two daughters of Andre and his family, particularly his two daughters, were the people that she was closest to in her family. She really wanted nothing to do with her brothers. But it was the Wertheimers who inherited Chanel. Nobody really knows what happened to all the money, and the company is private, so it's hard to know what it's worth. A lot.
Who is a designer today who is of the influence and importance of Chanel?
There really isn't anyone. There just isn't. There isn't anybody who's a Chanel. Just as in other arts, there aren't people who dominate like they used to because culture has been so balkanized. Maybe Beyonce, it's about as big as you can get in singing, or Taylor Swift, or Adele, I don't know, but there isn't anybody in fashion who dominates the way Chanel did in her time.
Okay, I might be getting questioned out here.
You want to open it up to the audience?
Yeah,
See, we do have some audience Q&A if we want to move to those.
Great.
So the first question, I think you may have hinted at it a little, is do you consider this an historical fiction novel? Do you think about your fiction in terms of genre classifications in that way?
No, I don't think about it in terms of historical fiction. I think about it as a novel, first and foremost, based on historical characters.
Definitely. I think there's been a lot of fascination in recent years in literature with people really wanting to narrow down and classify books into these categories. They just don't really fit. We've got a question from James, which says, in taking the script for a play and turning it into a novel, was it as simple as making the stage directions longer? How much more to it is there?
It was completely transformed. I mean, first of all, the play was much shorter than the novel, and I had to completely rethink it and rethink the character. There were little pieces of the play that ended up in the novel, but it was a totally different.
Looks like another question we have is kind of craft related. After the research stage, how do you approach the story crafting stage of fiction versus nonfiction?
Well, I find fiction much harder to write than nonfiction. That could be just me, perhaps, because I started out as a journalist and a nonfiction writer. Fiction is very tricky to get it to work and build to a climax, and you have to rely on your imagination. You can't, with nonfiction, you can go back and do more research. If you hit a roadblock or you feel that you're not understanding something well enough, or you're not able to capture it and close well enough, you can go back and do more research and get more facts and rely on the record. But with a novel, you have to delve into yourself and find it and then you solve the narrative problem. And that's really, really difficult to do.
Definitely. And then if we wanted to circle back, we started to answer the question of women you think kind of epitomize our current age. I think we said AOC, which I totally agree with.
And Elizabeth Warren, and thinking of all the women in politics who have had such a strong impact. Hillary Clinton was going to run for president. So I think in terms of, and I think of women now who epitomize our current time, I'm thinking of mostly political figures, but I just sort of thought of that, which is very interesting. Not fashion figures. But
yeah, that kind of ties back to that there's no one like Coco Chanel in fashion today. There's not the same kind of influence in the creative arts, maybe, that... Well, if anyone else in the audience has any questions, please, Carol.
When I was about 85 pages in, to the novel, I emailed Gioia and I said I thought it would make a great movie, a TV limited series, a feature film. Who would you, if that were to happen and you were willing to let somebody adapt your book for the small screen or the big screen, and the showrunner or director said, "Who should we cast as Coco?" Who would you cast? Who would be? I mean, who would be the Coco of in her 50s and 60s?
Kate Blanchett. I'm gonna Kristen Scott Thomas. They're a great actress. There was a student actress who acted a scene from the book at an event in Chicago last week. She's all of 20, and she nailed it.
Yes,
brilliant. So I think any brilliant actress could do it.
Yeah, I do think it would. It's got the elements that would make a really gripping movie or TV thing. So.
Nothing like it.
I totally agree. Well, everyone seems to be quiet. We may be a little questioned out, and we're right about at an hour. So the last thing I like to ask all of our authors and guests is there anything you have coming up, other than obviously your wonderful new book, that you want to do a plug for? Do you, Gioia, have more events coming up you want people to know about? Carol, is there anything you have in the works you would like to share?
I'm going to try to adopt Gioia's work ethic, and I'm working on a memoir, so that's where I am now, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm working with Kate Blanchett. That's interesting because she, one of my books was what I participated in Mrs. America, the FX series about Phyllis Schlafly, and Kate Blanchett did a brilliant job of playing her. So I'm trying to have the same kind of deal go forward with Catherine Graham, who's another one of my subjects. So that's what I'm doing now, but no events. So this was fun for me, a little different.
Catherine Graham is a great subject, and yours will probably be a movie before mine will, Carol. And best of luck to you. And if I post my events on my website, which is just, you can Google my name and you'll get it. I want to thank everybody for, I was going to say zooming in, but we're not on Zoom. So, crowdcasting in. And to Madison Street Books for hosting, and Carol for doing the conversation, and to Josie for being such a lovely, delightful moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for joining us. Thanks for giving us your time and thoughts this evening. Thank you for both writing fantastic books that we get to chat about and read. This was really lovely. I'd like to remind everyone you can come back and rewatch this event at any time at the same registration link. You can share it with your friends. They can watch it in the future. And I'll give one more pitch that if you haven't already, you can buy both of their books from us or from your local indie bookstore. Give it great reviews. This was such a lovely novel to read. We've had so much fun with it here. It's been really popular with our, I guess, readers, our customers. But thank you both for taking the time to spend with us, and best of luck.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Carol. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
Night.